always forget if it was, I think it's Jack Kornfield, right, who wrote like After Enlightenment, The Laundry. Was it Jack Kornfield? Yeah. I remember being 13 years old in Bodh Gaya, India, sitting there in a room of about 20 people listening to Jack Kornfield give like a 3 hour Dharma talk. And he talked about this very thing. And I remember it from when I was 13. Um, you know, yeah, so the ecstatic state, the state of union with something greater than ourselves, greater than our normal daily rhythms of life, sits at the foundation of ritual, and it's a huge part of why human beings do ritual. And in that state, one of the prime characteristics of that state, right, is that we feel our interconnectivity with all beings and all things. We feel devotional love. We feel this great outpouring. Um, and then we have to transition out of the ritual space. So the ritual space is what you could call eternal space, right? It's deliberately carved out space. People have probably heard the distinction, like in the Greek language, that's made sometimes between Chronos and Kairos, right? Between chronological daily time and Kairos, which is more eternal time. Ritual seeks to carve out a space through which we can access the eternal. And many traditions build it into their regular calendar, they build it into their weekly calendar. Sundays, traditionally in Western culture, were for this, right? New moons, full moons, uh, quarter moons like we have today. And then, you know, both are necessary, right? Some people say, well, why can't we just dwell in the eternal space all the time? Well, it's hard to pay the bills and take care of the kids if we're dwelling in that eternal space all the time, right? And it's interesting that even the cultures that have the greatest access to the natural world, like even hunter-gatherer cultures that live totally immersed in nature, they still carve out time as ritual time, as eternal time, right? Sometimes we think like, oh, I'll just kind of go back to nature and run around in nature, and that's the eternal time. But even nature-based cultures feel the need to have specifically designated time that is the eternal time of ritual, right? So both are necessary. It's like a balance, right? We need the chronological, and then we need the kairotic, I think the word would be, right? The kairotic, the eternal. Um, the challenge is, how do you translate the eternal back into the everyday, right? And I'm not going to claim to be an expert on this. I can tell you, you know, I think I just want to throw this in there too. I think that this challenge is magnified in an age of pervasive psychedelic journeying. um, I think people have heard my opinions on entheogenic work, and I'm strongly in favor of it. But I think it's also worth noting that when people, their journey into the eternal is like blasting so far out and like, journeying on these immense journeys, it can make that integration back into the daily, that it can make that chasm even more pronounced, if you know what I mean, right? Like, wow, I just drank the soma and communed with the gods and felt immortal and saw the creation of the universe, and now I have to go like pour coffee at Starbucks the next day or something like that, right? Like, how does one do that? There are examples in the Indian traditions of, saints who just beamed it all the time. They just beamed love, and, you know, people who just would step into their presence would be overwhelmed with it. That's a rare, rare being. Um, you know, that again, this is a question that there's a lot of different ways that we could approach it, and I'll just talk just about my personal experience. The I have seen the chasm of which you speak. I have been driving around on in traffic the next day after an incredible, experience of union, and all of a sudden I'm like shaking my fist at the other drivers on the road. right? The real test is like how we are in traffic, right? like if you really want to put human beings to the test, like have them navigate four-way stop intersections in New Mexico and see how it goes. Right? So I feel it acutely. I feel what you're talking about. My feeling is that through ritual practice and regular access to the eternal, we start to develop what you could call a vibrational sensitivity. And within that vibrational sensitivity, we start to feel much more deeply and more acutely the effects of our words and our actions, right? We actually start to see it play out in front of us. And so, I mean, I've talked in when I was teaching yoga asana, I've talked about how if all of the practice, all of the ritual, all of the meditation, all of it is so that in that one interaction in my life, that one interaction in my life, I can find a little bit more spaciousness, and in that spaciousness can have a little bit more facility in how I handle the situation, right? So that I don't create turbulent waves that I'm going to end up paying the price for like the next however many years, because words are powerful, right? If you run around saying it's all vibration, right, then you have to be willing to look at the vibration of words and how powerful they are and what we say and how we interact with other people, right? And this is really ultimately what it's all for. It's all for, you know, it's all so that we can walk a better road in this life. It's all so that we can interact with others more harmoniously, right? It's all so that we can see that when that whole part of the inanimate objects podcast where, Rose Simpson was talking about the recognition that we're being watched. That doesn't have to be this Orwellian 1984 type realization, right? It's the realization that, in a sentient world, everything I do matters. Like everything matters. How I, you know, how I talk to my neighbor matters. How I open up space for others to share matters. How I am with my kids matters.